What's up, YouTube fam? This is your girl, Loryn Denise, host of This Too Shall Suck podcast, a fresh perspective on grief. If you are coming back to this channel, welcome back. If you are here for the first time, welcome. I hope you enjoy the channel. Click around and see what resonates with you. You guys, on this episode, this is part 2 of the kind of therapy conversation that we've been having, why it's important to go to therapy during your grieving process. And on this episode, I have the pleasure and honor of bringing on Dr. Ayana Abrams. She's an absolutely amazing, phenomenal woman who specializes in so many different things. In this episode, we dive into so much about just grieving and the therapy process in general. We talk about relationships and what that looks like, kind of the griefs that happen in those relationships, how to work through those. We talk about why it's important to go to therapy, not necessarily when you are unwell, but when you are in really a good mental space and, some things to do, take some off when you're doing well, things like that. And really just why it's important to go to therapy during the grieving process and what that looks like for you and what grief is and how that can impact your growth. And so I'm really, really excited for this episode. She dropped so many amazing gems and I just was like, the whole time. So whatever resonates with you, I cannot wait to hear. Make sure you leave a comment at the end. Let me know what was your favorite part. And I cannot wait to meet you guys in the comments. I hope you all enjoy this episode. Welcome back, my loves, to another episode. Thank you guys for being here. If this is your first time here, welcome. If this is your second, third, fourth, fifth, 26th, 27th time here, welcome back. I'm so excited to have you guys here. So as you guys know, this is part 2 of the kind of, I don't want to call it a series, but it's part 2 of the why therapy is so important during your grieving process. So part 1, I had Justin DeBoles, LPC on. And on this episode, I brought Dr. Ayana Abrams. Like I said, I wanted to have a guy's perspective and a woman's perspective. So we talk about so much in this episode. I cannot wait for you guys to hear. I don't have a long intro. I know I typically kind of do like a long, or not a long, but give you guys points and everything. But I think I did that on the first one. And so this one, I really wanted to get more of Dr. Ayana's conversation. I want you guys to hear more of that because we really get into some really, really amazing topics. So I cannot wait for you guys to hear it. Like I said, not a long intro. What is this, a minute? So stay tuned for this episode. Like I said, we dive into so much, not just about of course, we talk about why it's important, to go to therapy during the grieving process, but really, just the importance of grief. We even touch on relationships and what that looks like, the strong Black woman complex, where that came from, how, grief can kind of play into your relationship, what that looks like, what therapy looks like if you're not in a, we'll say, unwell place, right? And so we really go into some really, really amazing topics that I can't wait for you guys to hear. So, like I said, I'm not going to be long. So we're going to go ahead and dive right into it. All right, you guys, I am very, very excited to have on this next guest. Y'all, I'm so excited. So y'all know that I love Justin and I love bringing him on to talk about therapy, but I had to represent for my ladies. So I definitely had to bring a phenomenal woman on. So I'm going to read her bio and we're going to get right into it. Dr. Ayana Abrams is a licensed clinical psychologist, CEO, and founder of Ascension Behavioral Health, and co-founder of Not So Strong, an initiative to improve the mental health and relationship functioning of Black women through use of vulnerable storytelling. Her specialties include racism-based trauma, mood disorder treatment, burnout prevention, and helping people create and recreate healthy romantic career and familial relationships. She has extensive clinical and research experience working with Black people across the dysphoria and has been featured as a speaker or contributing writer in the New York Times, Essence, We Work, Vice and Allure magazines, Therapy for Black Girls, and Silence the Shame. She is also a contributing author to the forthcoming book, Emotionally Focused Therapy for African American Couples, Love Heals, to be published by Routledge in fall 2021. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome the beautiful Miss Dr. Ayana Abrams.
Thank you. I feel tired just listening to that bio. Ooh, goodness.
Listen, you out here putting in work, okay? Okay, I'm healing the people, okay? So thank you again for being here. I really just excited about this whole episode. I did one with guy therapists. So now, like I said, I represent the ladies because they're always like, I'm like, okay, don't worry about it. I got y'all. I got you. Got you. Okay, we got you. So, and I knew it was super important to bring on someone who looks like me because that is kind of where my therapy journey, I'll say, I took it to the next level. And so, let's definitely get right into it. What made you get into this field? And, obviously you have extensive background, but what made you get into this field?
Yeah. It's always an easy and a hard question. A lot of therapists call ourselves wounded healers, right? That there was something that kind of brought us into even thinking about how our behavior and kind of how our experiences kind of blend and mesh in those ways. And I became interested in psychology in high school. I took a psychology course, and we watched a movie called Pay It Forward with Haley Joel Osment. And that made me more interested in, I'd always wanted to be a teacher before that, but then this kind of opened up my eyes in terms of psychology and like families and how they kind of navigate when children aren't doing well or kind of need more in some way. So that kind of sparked my interest, and I majored in psychology and African American studies in college because I also knew that I wanted to work with people who looked like me. And I think that came from my own personal place of, my parents are Caribbean. I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey. So I had this kind of real-time experience with feeling different, kind of feeling confused at kind of different ages and stages, having to be one way inside the home and being another way living in a white neighborhood in the suburbs of New Jersey outside of the home. And,
right.
So just kind of navigating all of that and navigating a lot of that on my own, right, essentially, and not really having a lot of people to talk to about that. So I've always been interested in how and why I was having responses in this way and why other people would respond differently. And then in high school and learning that there's an actual science to this, that there was something I could study. I was also a high achiever, right? So putting that together with this interest was the perfect blend to major in this and then go to the highest tier of it, which is getting my doctorate in it, right? To kind of develop an expertise in the kind of healing model around this. And like I said, I was originally interested in working with children. And then by the time I got to graduate school and did my first, we call them externships, like first like field placement with children, realized that that's not for me. I am
not my ministry.
Not interested. I'm not fitting to get on the ground with y'all and do all this stuff. So that I quickly transitioned, right? I quickly transitioned to working with adults, college-aged population, undergrad, graduate school, professional school. And then after that, once I got into practice and moved to Atlanta, it opened up. I'd already had a bit of an interest, but it really opened up my eyes in terms of couples work. So now that's the mix of what I do is individual, groups, couples, and then consulting with organizations around race and racism, diversity, equity, and mental and cultural health of employees and staff.
I love it. I love it all. I love it all. I love it all. So I kind of want to dive into, there was a couple things there. I mean, there were several things there that I was like, oh, I'm going to ask her this. I'm going to ask her this, but a couple things. So like you said, you focus like now on couples. So I have an episode coming up kind of about grief in relationships and dating and couples and things like that. So what, when, again, because people come to this and they're like, oh, no one died. I'm not thinking about grief in that way. But the whole premise is that grief can come in several different things. So when it comes to maybe like grief in couples, what does that look like, on your end? Have you seen that? I'm sure you have, but have you seen that? And what does that look like to work through that for any of the couples who are listening?
Yeah, grief shows up in a multitude of ways, right, across relationships. One, that is any grief that individuals in a relationship are bringing into the relationship and kind of how they have understood that, how that has impacted them, how that, again, is either kind of resolved or unresolved in whichever way, what they're still carrying with them, because we know that grief is not I don't think the world is still kind of coming around to this. Grief is not something that you kind of deal with and then it's done and you put away, right? But it's this new part of you that you bring with you, right, into these other parts of your life and moving forward.
Okay.
So they bring their own individual stories of grief, even if they won't name it as grief, and then things that can happen within a partnership. So that can be grief when it comes to, you know, ailing parents, right, or medical diagnoses that either the couple is navigating or they're navigating with family members. So that can be children, that can be aunts, uncles, that can be parents, you know, transitioning into elder care, right? Though there's a whole gamut of, right, grief as it relates to that. I work in maternal mental health. So we are talking about, you know, fetal grief, you know, infancy loss, child loss. So things like that in terms of like how couples navigate that and how difficult that is when grief can look different in partners, right? Regarding the same loss. So there's that kind of grief that I've seen in my practice. And there's grief in terms of, you know, when couples are engaging in this work and really trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work for them. Oftentimes there's a grief of how they wanted their relationship to go, how they thought the relationship would be. There's a grieving in terms of sometimes a loss of identity, right, once they are in a relationship. But oftentimes the way in which I'll see and kind of talk about grief is ways in which couples, you know, every 3 to 5 years, we have different needs. And what does it mean to kind of grieve who we were at the beginning of this relationship? And now we're in conflict and now we're sad and now we're hurting. So there's a whole grieving process there where couples say, I want to get back to who we were when we first met, when we were dating, before this thing happened to us, right? So there's a grieving process there, right? In terms of how do you understand yourselves now and what has changed since you met 5 years ago, 20 years ago, right? So there's a nuanced grieving process with that as well. And again, a grieving that comes up in a more nuanced way is who I want my partner to be, and when my partner disappoints me. That's a grief, right? What it shows up as is a frustration, right? Is an argument, is a conflict, is a demand, is anxiety, right? But essentially, what's happening there is that I longed for something, and this person didn't have what I needed. Right. And in my response to that grief, this is what I'm doing or saying or whatever it is, right, in terms of how it manifests. And oftentimes couples get stuck how things are manifesting, but they're not really talking about, man, that must have really hurt when you leaned into your partner and they weren't there for you in whichever way, right? So that's a grief, right? Even if we don't name it as grief. So those are things that commonly show up with partners when they come in.
Oh, that's really, really good. There were so many things there. I'm like, like, yeah, that was really, really good. So something that, so I was telling Dr. Ayana before we got on that my friends, when I told them that she was coming on, they gave me a list of questions to ask her. So here's my list of questions, y'all.
I am here.
So I appreciate it. So one of the things that they asked, and maybe this could, you know, individually or in grief. So we were talking about, my sister and I were actually talking about the strong Black woman narrative. Right.
Okay.
How is that affecting Black women, and where did that come from, that narrative?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, the narrative is for everything, right? You know, very historical, and you know, has its roots in, you know, the period of enslavement, in which, you know, Black women are the only race that was required to perform, right, in the same ways as our male counterparts, right? So the work that was required, not only were we raising, you know, our babies and other babies, we were also required to engage in field work and do all this kind of manual labor. We are the only racialized group, right, that's been required to kind of play all of these roles. And essentially, right, what that left us with was this high demand of how we would be able to perform in all these different ways, and also a necessity to perform in those ways because of how fragmented the Black family became due to enslavement, right, and kind of pulling families apart, right? So it began and it was rooted in things that were necessary for our survival. So not things that we chose and say like, hey, I want to do all of these things, but in order to save my life and save the life of my family, I have to do these things, right? And then you move through different eras, you know, post enslavement, and that theme was still there, right? Families were still being broken up, and there are ways in which Black women had to learn and understand and navigate ways in which I need to take care of everyone. What's happening along the course of that, right, is that everyone else becomes more important than me. because children have needs and demands, partner has needs and demands, community has needs and demands, whoever I'm working for, right? Because it was typically domestic, have needs and demands. So it becomes this kind of like more kind of subservient way, right, to be in the world. And again, we're more and more fragmented, right? So we're now at the bottom of the list if we're even on the list at all. We're the last on the list in those ways, right? So there's a reason, right, for all of this. And the other piece that comes with that is the vulnerability, right? Vulnerability and needing help was also really risky for us, right? Because one, what if people wouldn't come through? And two, what if people would weaponize our vulnerability against us by saying that we're no longer capable of doing this or this or this? So even the ways in which we engage is really rooted and has actually been really important for our survival. What we're paying attention to now is when it's crossing that threshold, right? So it's not about not being strong. It's not about not being resilient. It's not about, not working hard and doing these things, but it tips the scale, right? To where we're not taking care of ourselves in these really fundamental ways because we don't have the practice at kind of navigating that and kind of creating our own nuances around it. So hence we now have this, schema or the ways in which we show up in the world where we don't take care of ourselves and we also don't allow other people to take care of us, right? It feels too risky, and really trying to help women work through that so that it becomes more of a dimmer switch where I can turn this on and off versus a light switch. And it's like either I need all of this or I don't need anything from anybody. It's like, sometimes you need some things and sometimes you need less. But how do we put you back in control so that this can feel like more of a dimmer switch for you?
Oh, I love that. I love that analogy of the dimmer and not necessarily the switch. Because speaking for myself, I am taking care of everybody. The one, right? There's the one in the family. So like having to be that one and like you said, turn it on and off. And it's like, no, I got it. I can do it. So hearing you explain that, like now I understand. So to kind of piggyback off that, you were talking about the couples. How does that manifest and show itself within like couples? I'll say Black couples specifically, because I feel like there's always the conversation of like the strong Black woman and the Black man, and she doesn't need a man, the independent woman complex. Like, how does that manifest and what type of, I'll say chaos, turmoil, or, problems, issues, what does that cause within the Black, structure of relationships?
Yeah, it's really not, I don't know if it's coincidental you asked. I just finished the edits on a book chapter about African-American couples and how Black women show up in relationships with Black men, as well as same-sex relationships. So what this creates is what we call a kind of a role strain, right? So essentially what happens oftentimes in Black couples is that it's the intersection of race and gender, right, with these couples. And Black men in heterosexual relations with Black women are taught and socialized, right, that they need to be the providers in the family, right? So that is financial provider as well as like shelter and kind of these, big ticket items. I need to build you the house and the white picket fence and the lawn and all these things, right? Labored tasks, and being sold this American dream, right, that they've actually never been able to attain in full capacity, right? So what happens is there's already strain there, and that is all that they have been taught about how they can contribute to a family, right? Black women becoming higher earners in the household, becoming more educated, right, than Black men in terms of high school and advanced degrees, and making more money and being able to kind of play more roles in that way completely undermines that American dream, right? That Black men are oftentimes, sold and taught that this is your role. This is what you're supposed to be, her protector in these ways, right? So what's the protector supposed to do when she got it all? What's the protector supposed to do when I actually need her for stuff because, right, I'm not getting hired, right? I am being violated physically and emotionally and mentally day to day, right? I'm being incarcerated at higher rates, right? So that dream that we have been sold about what the quote unquote heterosexual relationship, again, man is supposed to do and what the woman is supposed to do has never fit Black people. So there's much more strain, right, when we find ourselves trying to fit into this American dream that wasn't made for Black people in the first place. That's a dream for white people, right? Where Black women can be, stay at home, homemaker, not have to worry about this. Like that is not our experience, right? Particularly here.
Right.
So what that's left for Black couples is a lot of confusion, a lot of resentment, and a lot of disorientation around, well, what role are we supposed to play in here, right? Because women are being again, per the American dream, right? Women are being raised to be protected, right, by men. But Black girls are taught, don't wait on no man.
Mm-hmm.
You get what you need to get.
Right.
Right. You get your education, you get your coin. Don't
Yep.
wait on him.
Right.
Right.
Go get your bag,
That doesn't
sis.
go. Yeah. that doesn't go with how men are socialized, saying like, hey, you got to be her protector. Right. These things literally don't go together. And essentially research has always shown, and clinical and quantitative research has always shown that Black families also tend to be more egalitarian, right? Where the best way for us to figure this out is that we level the playing field. We can't engage in that kind of hierarchical, kind of patriarchal, so that does not work for us. Whoever's making the money, we got to figure this out. Whoever can do this, we got to figure this out. Whoever can best navigate the childcare based on how that lands with money and time and all stuff is the one to figure this out, versus these very strict and rigid gendered roles. So that's how it shows up a lot in couples work, but even for the couples that don't make it into couples work, that's a lot of what Black families are navigating. How do we figure out this role and figure it out for ourselves, versus what we have been told about what it should look like. And that's all the confusion and all the, the fight you see on Instagram and social media with this. Right. Oftentimes it's about this role strain that says like, oh, this is who I'm taught to be for you. And you don't need it. Oh, you too independent, right? And there's ego that comes in. There's a lot of things that come in with that. So, so one of the main issues you will see, or that I see, is navigating that role, right, and getting couples to be able to speak openly, right, about not only what they were taught and what they envision for this relationship, but actually getting them to a place of what actually works for you two. Because I'm hearing you say that this is what it's supposed to be, but you dating somebody who don't got none of that. So like, help me make it make sense. Right. So how can this actually look for your relationship? And does this actually work for you? And where do those ideas come from? And were those actually kind of made for you in those ways? So offering a lot of education and improving their communication, they can actually have real conversations about that, and the disappointments and the grief that comes with, oh, I wanted to be this for you, or I needed you to be this for me, and you're not doing it, and it's not happening, and I'm having a really hard time with that.
Right. Like, what does that even look like? Do I even know how to convey what that looks like, or even communicate what I need? Because this is what I've learned. I'll say specifically for me, like growing up, I saw my parents, 2-parent household, but I can honestly say we never sat down and had a conversation of what a relationship should look like. I just saw kind of, this is what I think it should be. And so I recognized when I was going to relationships, I'm looking for this, not really understanding what this is, right? So that's like that's really good. That's like I'm listening, getting my own therapy session, y'all.
So I'm always asking about relationship role models and the assessment process when I'm working, when I'm about to start working with partners in a relationship. I'm asking you about what did you see in wherever you were raised and whoever you were raised by, right? So we're looking for explicit messages, like what were you told? What did they tell you needed to do and be in this way? But what did you see and bear witness to? Because we also internalize a lot of that. And I asked, very explicitly and very specifically, what messages, depending on, so say I have a Black male heterosexual partner who is dating a Black woman heterosexual partner who maybe is in corporate America or something about money. So I will ask specifically, what messages have you received in your childhood, adolescence, or adulthood about Black women who make money? I want to know, what are these messages that are there, right, that are more than likely under how you are reacting and responding to things, but you might not be very conscious of that, right? What messages did you receive about Black women when you were a child or adolescent? Oh, well, I saw that they did everything around the house. I never saw a woman work outside the home. Well, that's helpful for me to know, because you don't know what to do with your wife.
Okay.
Right? You have all these expectations based on what you saw of your aunt or your grandmother or whoever it was, and you don't know how to respond to this. You don't know what to do when she says we putting the baby in daycare, right? And that's causing a lot of issues, right? And not because she's doing something wrong, but because you don't have a roadmap for this. So that offers us, now we can have a totally different conversation where I'm able to kind of pull in. Well, that makes a lot of sense that you get really confused by this. You've never seen this. And then it's like, so I can offer some empathy and some compassion there, and also allow the partner to see like, oh, well, that's where some of this is coming from. He don't know what to do.
Right.
Right. He doesn't know, right? Is it right? So now we get to figure this out together. But that's why I pull in a lot of that historical data about, again, role models and messages that we receive across our lifetime, because usually those are the things that are right under the surface of how we're acting and responding in the moment. The assumptions, right, that aren't matching up with how this person is behaving.
Oh, this makes sense. Ooh, girl, look, I am getting my whole life because I'm like, woo, she reading me like a book. Got it. So look, I'm like looking at my questions, like what's a question I can piggyback off that? So I guess a question to kind of piggyback off that, because all of that was amazing. And again, getting my whole life over here. Maybe I get in a relationship now because I can, baby, So for those people who are listening, and I know there's a lot of people who are like, no therapy, nothing wrong, and I'll say again, specifically in the Black community, it's always been what happens in this house stays in this house. You don't need to go to therapy. You're not crazy. That type of idea. Where did that, and I asked Justin on the last one, so I definitely wanted your input as where did that ideology come from? And how do we get past that? I think our generation is doing really good at that, but like, how do we kind of get past that and keep that going moving forward?
Yeah. Again, like I said, most of the questions you might ask me when you say, where did it come from? Enslavement. Right. And messages that we've received and ways in which we have been, historically excluded from different types of, certain types of care has made it very foreign to us, right? And things that are very foreign feel really scary, right? When it comes to, what happens in therapy versus what happens in different now, because they're showing a lot more therapy on TV. So I think people have a bit of a better sense if it's not like super like salacious and therapist is sleeping with a client. Like,
right.
Ain't that an old storyline? Like, we still doing this, but okay. It feels like this mystery right behind there. When it comes to, mental and emotional distress, because we can't see it, it's very hard for people to kind of understand what that could be about, which feels really scary for a lot of people. But I think also even adding in when it comes to Black people and religion and spirituality, right? Those things have historically been seen as counter, right? And really undermined by, mental health and psychological treatment versus being able to see these as really pairing together really well, right? As a way of like, hey, we can all be sources and kind of spaces of support for you, and one doesn't negate the other. But oftentimes, depending on how you were raised and which religion, which spirituality, and how either rigid that was, how fluid that was, if there was autonomy within that, it'll have a correlation, right, with how safe other spaces feel. And, historically going back to, I think you had named it before, like, we don't talk about what's happening inside this house, outside of the house. You don't tell strangers your business. And that was a survival skill. We couldn't tell white people what was going on in the house, right? We were already, right, vulnerable and already in danger. We can't let them know that we're even more vulnerable, right? Because whichever is not going well here, right? They use that against us. They would harm us, right, in those ways. So it's still the aftermath, right, and the kind of consequence of that history. That yes, absolutely. The what are the generations? Millennial and Gen Zers? Is that the next one?
Yeah, I think Z. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm vintage millennial. I don't know what I'm considered. But this, right, this generation, I think more so because they have been witness and navigated the consequences, right, of baby boomers and our generation that did not take care of themselves and did a whole bunch of stuff. They're just like, nah, we can't repeat that. I navigated this with my parents. My parents were miserable about this. They fought all the time. They had a nasty divorce, or they didn't get divorced, and it ruined my life because they stayed together for the kid, like all this stuff. And they're just like, we're not doing that. We're not repeating this. They were miserable. They were miserable. And that, again, these role models, right? So I think with this generation that's talking a lot more, and I know older people get annoyed with it, but
yes,
talking a lot more because it's saying like, I don't want that life.
That's right.
For me, right? And I hear that, my great-grandparents and my grandparents, and you were like this, and it's got to stop somewhere, right? And then you add in technology and all those things. So I think that's why we're noticing that it is changing a lot, and changing with like an intensity as well, where like I'll see these funny memes that say like, yeah, you remember those times it would be like, yeah, I can't tell anybody I had a therapist. It's like, let me tell you what my therapist said last night.
Okay.
Let me just listen. She read this, right? That's very different than 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Where you would never let anybody know that you would ever seek help, right? Because the stigma that's attached is kind of weakness, and you should be strong enough to control everything in your life and never have any distress in any way that you would need some help around. And, quite frankly, because, the mental health space was forged by and most utilized by white people, there are also reasons why they're ahead of the game in a lot of ways, right? They've tapped into a wider support network. For centuries, they've been getting therapy, right? Yeah. So there's a reason. Doesn't mean that they're clearly not they're clearly not all well, right? But them being able to utilize, right, all the resources at their whim puts them at an advantage, right? So we're still, again, navigating the consequences of centuries of disadvantage and what that looks like now. That's not necessarily to kind of catch up, but to resource ourselves and to take care of ourselves in that way. So I love seeing more and more, conversations and content and therapists, taking things out of the office and really engaging with the community around mental health care and support.
Yeah, no, I love that. I absolutely love that because you are right. I have friends who are like, yeah, I've been in therapy since I was 5. I'm like, oh, that wasn't a conversation in my house. It was therapy. What is? I didn't learn about that until my mom passed away. I was like, oh, that's a thing. Yeah. Okay, that's cool.
That's a thing, and that speaks volumes, right? That's a relationship that they've been used to having and navigating and trying out and testing out all over the world since they were 5. Imagine if the Black community was in therapy since we were 5. We already unstoppable, but imagine if we had this space since we were 5. So it's things like that, right, that we're seeing kind of changing, but the progression will be slow just by default. Yeah. There's a lot of work for us to do.
Of course. And I think that you said, we're doing the work, and like you said, vintage millennial. That's all I'm like, am I like, I think we're like older millennial, and then they have like younger millennial, then Gen Z. I'm just here. I'm in the millennial group. You're welcome. What's up, y'all?
Yeah. Exactly.
So a question that somebody asked, they said, to me, it's not a silly question. I think it's a real question. Is there a way for you to prepare for therapy? And I told them, I was like, go and be open and be vulnerable. But, I said, I'll ask a professional for you.
Understood. And it depends on the person. I recognize sometimes that comes from an anxious place. Sometimes that comes from a place of people who tend to be, achievers, and kind of they are used to kind of performing in some way. They want to know what to do. They want to have rules for how to be a good client, right? So oftentimes I'm paying attention to clients who I want homework, I want something to do in between, I want something that can say that I'm doing this well. Yes. Usually that's related to a lot of other stuff, so it's usually a bit telling. But usually what we will say is, come, we want you to be as open as feels safe to be open, right? So you maybe having a hard time sharing some things doesn't mean that you're a bad client. This is a relationship, right? So you want to enter this in the same ways in which we think about other relationships, which means in order for us to get close, in order for it to be the intimate space, right? It means that there has to be some vulnerability. It has to be a relational connection, but there has to be honesty and transparency on your part. Doesn't mean that I have to know everything about you, right? First time we meet, or even second time or eighth time that we meet. But being able to come with some kind of open mind and some hope that says maybe this space could help me, right? And if you don't have the hope, we hold it for you and with you until we can transfer it all over to you. But showing up and let us do our job, right? We are actually the ones, particularly in the first session, we'll be guiding a lot of the first sessions. There's nothing for you to do outside of, more than likely, it's going to be like paperwork to do beforehand. And, we have, squared away information about, payment fees, insurance, things like that. So usually that will be the only thing you need to do beforehand. If you've taken some notes and you want to come because you've thought about what could be helpful, great, but that's not necessary. We're going to guide the session with our assessment questions, and we'll take you through the whole session with that.
Yeah, no, I love that. So I kind of want to piggyback off that a little bit to, I guess, pair it with that. What does it look like to, or what does finding the right therapist look like? I'll say for me specifically, I think I called 3 therapists before I found my first one. And then my first one kind of got me through that heavy part of grief. But again, I knew that I wanted someone who looked like me to kind of continue my journey. But again, it was a process. So, what have you seen, from a therapist perspective? What does that look like? And even for you, what is the right client, if that's even a thing, look like as well?
Yeah, many of us have our like ideal clientele and clients that populations that we specialize in, or mental health issues that we specialize in. So even if that's not all of our clientele, we'll usually have a higher percentage, like 75 or higher, of our specialty population. So, I mean, even just what you had said, like, I knew that I want someone who looked like me. So that's important for you to consider and think about, right? Am I open? And how safe do I feel with other either racial, ethnic, sexual orientation communities in general in the world, right? Think about who you feel safest around, and that might help lead you towards who you might want to work with. So whether that be based on race, sometimes that can be based on religion or spirituality. That can be based on sexual orientation. That can be based on gender. That can be based on, able-bodiedness, right? If you're looking for a therapist who might kind of share in different aspects of your identity, you can search for those things, right? If that is a community that you feel safer with, absolutely search for that. So that's one piece of it. 2, you want to pay attention to how you feel in the space. You want to pay attention to, what it's like to enter the space. I know it's mostly virtual now, but you want to pay attention to the systems that are set up. But typically when we were in person, how does it feel kind of getting to the office? How safe does the office space feel in of itself? Where are you sitting, right? What's the proximity, right, to therapists? Like, you want to just kind of pay attention to what it feels like in the room. How comfortable does it feel? There's a way in which, therapists say, we are safe spaces. We want to be safe to you. But I always say that I don't get to determine that I'm safe for you. You tell me if I'm safe for you, right? So I can hold up the sticker saying safe space, safe space, safe space, but no, you let me know what I can do to offer you safety in this room, because it's a collaborative process. And it's a relationship. And being able to remember that, this is a relationship. Right. We recognize that I call it it's an atypical social relationship because it's not balanced. You don't know a lot about me. Yeah, I might use some self-disclosure in a therapeutic way, but you're not going to hear a lot about my life. So it is atypical, but it's still a relationship nonetheless. So you have to pay attention to how safe you feel, because if you don't feel safe, then you're not going to be vulnerable. And if you're not going to be vulnerable, you're not going to get your needs met in that way. And what people actually don't know, most therapists know, is that the biggest marker of change is not our degree, is not our specialty, is not those things. The biggest marker of change is the relationship, is how you feel with us. And when you feel safer and you can be more vulnerable with a therapist, that's more than likely going to get you to the change that you want to see.
Yeah.
All right. Not these, very particular things. But if you do have a sense of what you are looking for in terms of if you're in distress, if you know that you have a mental health diagnosis, if you're curious about it, if you just want to know more about yourself, you can also search by that kind of criteria. You can say, Black therapist who works with addiction, Black therapist who works with, teenagers who are on the autism spectrum. Right, but whatever it might be, Black therapist who works with couples and infidelity, right? You can now Google, right? It's actually much easier if you just search some of those criteria to try to get as specific as possible. So yes, you want to pay attention to how you feel. You want to be able to ask questions about, and you'll usually see a lot of this on a therapist website, training, where they might be from, what their specialties are, how they work with clients. Will usually include some mix of that. But you want to pay attention to energies in the room. You want to pay attention to, and then the reason I say pay attention to and not, because again, based on what you are coming in for, if you tend to have an anxious lean, you're probably going to feel anxious in the first session. That doesn't necessarily mean that the space is not safe, but you already have an anxious lean. So understand that I'm going to feel anxious in this space, right? I'm not going to make your anxiety go away when you're first meeting me. So also being able to use that kind of self-awareness and insight to say, I already have this lean. That's not going to go away in the first few sessions when I meet with this person, and it's not their responsibility to make this vanish. But to really kind of tease apart, like, is my anxiety about them not being good for me at this, or is that about just how I naturally present? Which is also the point I wanted to make, that even if a therapist is not a good fit for you, it also doesn't make them a bad or a poor therapist, again, because we're looking at the relationship. Right, that even if for some reason we don't mesh well, or you don't feel as safe or comfortable, or from me, I'm getting something from you that maybe, I know somebody who might be able to work with this person in a better way based on now what I've heard of their needs. Doesn't mean I'm a bad therapist. It doesn't mean that I've done something, awful or poor to you. It means that this might not be the best fit. So let me help you get to somebody who might be a better fit for you. No harm, no foul.
Yeah.
What also comes up with that is in seeking therapy, you might have to meet with a few people before you do find somebody who's a good fit. I hear people say, like, it's just like dating, and I get it, but it's not.
Right. I was like,
I get it though. I get it. Right. In terms of, like offering it offering it some time, right? Knowing that, hey, the first person I date might not be the person who I'm going to stay with long term, but being kind of open to what this relationship could bring, is I'm assuming kind of what that what the comparison means. But to be able to honor that I can meet with someone, and I have to be mindful of me getting attached to them having to be the perfect therapist for me, and like doing all the right things. It might take some quote unquote shopping around, and you can meet with a few different therapists, and based on your financial situation or your time, you can meet with a few different therapists and see who might be a better fit for you, and then choose the therapist who you feel safer with. We're also very familiar with that. You can't be meeting with us for like months.
Right.
Right. So like we'll usually give it like I would usually say something like because that typically is also not helpful, because you're talking about the same thing with three different people. It can get really confusing for clients. So usually what I will be open to is an assessment and maybe like 1 or 2 sessions. But like after that, if you are still considering another therapist, we choose the other therapist. Like that is fine. That is fine by me. But I don't want to have a prolonged relationship with a therapy client who's going for the same care with another therapist. If they're going for specific care, like say I'm working with a client on, either general issues or something very specific, say related to racism, and they also have ADHD, which I don't specialize in. So they might be working with a therapist who does ADHD. If they have a trauma history, they might also have a therapist who does EMDR, right? So in that way, you can be working with several therapists. But if you're going for like general kind of just open-ended care, it's typically not recommended that you have multiple therapists at the same time.
Oh, that's good. I didn't know, like thinking about that, like that makes sense. Like work with multiple therapists, like you said, if I have, super, super extra anxiety, and then I have, this going on over here. That's really good. I never thought about that, because back to your point, like someone who was going to perform, I'll say my original first therapy session, I was like, okay, I'm going to go in here. And I bust out crying in the first 2 minutes, so, but like now thinking about it, she made me feel comfortable. She made me feel open. Like there was smell. She had tissue. I was on the couch. Like, it was comfortable. But then even virtually, I'll say, for the people who are listening, who are like, I want to go in virtually. When I went to my other therapist, the Black one, she made me feel comfortable immediately off jump, just us talking, over the thing, even though we weren't able to come in, and so that's how I knew. But I did talk to 2 other therapists prior to the first one. I was like, I don't like your energy over the phone. Like, you think I'm about to come in? Like,
pay attention.
No. Yeah.
Pay attention to that, right? Pay attention to your sensory experience when you're around people. Like that is really, and that also helps you just kind of build confidence, right? And what you know about yourself. Pay attention to that, and just kind of use that as data for you.
Yep. Yeah. No, but that was good, because my next question was going to be about, going to, the dating of the therapist. So I'm glad that you touched on that. That's really good. So I only have a couple more questions. I won't hold you forever, even though I can talk to you all night about this, girl. So obviously this show is about grief, and we talk about that. So, and again, grief in all aspects, not just death, but what would you say is the importance of, or how important can therapy be in your healing process of grief?
Yeah. I think therapy can be remarkably important, not only in terms of helping you like understand and navigate some symptoms, right, that come with grief, whether that be crying, whether that be numbing, whether that be anger, whether that be confusion, right, all the different things that can come with how we feel. But what I really love about the therapeutic space when it comes to grief is to also help normalize is a word that's coming to mind, but in a lot of ways, right, normalizing grief as a part of life. And I think oftentimes culturally and kind of globally, we have a harder time with grief because we avoid it. We avoid it as something that is so common and so a part of our lives in so many different ways. Again, not only related to loss by death, but just again grieving and transitions. And because we tend to be so averse to it, it actually has really gotten in the way of us being able to practice honoring that grief is a part and a process that we've been going through for years. And again, there are different types of grief that happen at different points in our lives, but I think because we are so averse in general to unpleasant emotion, and that we push grief or anything related to grief so far away, that actually doesn't allow us to engage with it in a way that would be really healthy for us, right? And that doesn't mean like you need to do this as you're like prepared for everything, but just in a way where you understand it as a bit of a cycling, right, of how we move through different things that happen in life. And yes, they're recognizing, there are the different types of grief that are much more abrupt, that are much more jarring, that kind of happen in different ways. But our relationship to quote unquote negative affect or negative emotion really complicates how we can ever understand grief at any age or at any stage of anything. Like I have a few clients and just kind of people in general, we hear about grief when it comes to like parents and like, well, I don't want to talk about it, right? And because we don't talk about it, that means we know nothing about estate planning. We know nothing about funeral stuff. We don't know anything about. We don't get life insurance. Well, if I get life insurance, that means that I'm calling on death. I'm like, no, that's not what that means.
That's not
right. But in that avoidance, right, of it, it means that we don't prepare in certain ways for different aspects of what this could come with, right? So now we're left not only navigating grief, but now we're navigating finances, family conflict, like estate planning, like all these kinds of things, right? So that's an example of because we are so averse, right, to anything that feels distressing or unpleasant, it actually doesn't allow us to engage with the process of what that means for us, our family members, our partners, whatever it might be. And until we actually engage in that work to kind of bring grief in as a more like normal process, right, and kind of understanding of loss, we're going to have a really hard time. It's going to be really clunky, and it's going to be even more distressing than sometimes it might, I don't want to say need to be, but then it has been, right, for people. So I think just the ways in which we relate to emotional distress, and grief being one of the heightened points, right, of emotional distress. I think until we engage with it more and not push it so far away, we're going to just continue to have this really, really hard time and be really scared of it.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's the whole platform. I'm like, it's the thing. It's going to happen. It's not going to happen just from death. It happened, like you said, in relationships. I had a whole episode on funeral, like pre-planning your funeral, estate planning, all of these things, because these are a lot of things that I had to learn. But even like friendship breakups, how hard that is, like that whole coronavirus thing, how hard that is, being Black in the workplace, how crazy that looks. There's all these things, like you said, that people don't, necessarily assign to grief. But it's like, until we say like, you know what, maybe I am grieving in this moment. It doesn't have to be just like a ridiculous process that you're like, oh my God. Like it doesn't have to be that. So I think, so another thing, and for real, I'm going to be done. It's okay. I'm just like, oh my God. But another thing, so a myth, the big myth that you have to go to therapy when something is wrong. I think that's a myth. I don't think that something has to be necessarily wrong for you to go to grief. Is there a way to kind of dispel that myth, or what are your thoughts when people say, well, nothing's wrong with me, I don't need to go to therapy?
Yeah, and everybody has a right to not go. I always
Of
say, like, I
course.
ain't gonna force you in there, right? But
Okay.
what I really so yes, people wait too long. They wait until they're in crisis to then seek services. So we are always trying to get people to think about therapy as something that can be more preventative for you, or kind of maintenance or insightful, right? There are a lot more clients that I have now the past like 5 or 6 years who are coming in not because anything's wrong, but because some things are going well and they want to know how to sustain that. Like, how do I keep this going in this way? More people are coming in for like insightful work. Like, I'm not in any, grave distress, but I'm really curious that this keeps happening in these relationships. I'm really curious. I just want to like unpack some of those things. No major issues. Like, I'm still cool with my mom, but I just want to understand some things maybe before I enter these kinds of relationships, or like before I move or something like that. So we're seeing more people come in, not even because they're anticipating something being wrong or something being wrong, but because they're now being able to see it as a space of like, oh, okay, I can do some different work in here. And this is actually maybe the only space in many people's lives where I get to fully be myself, where this is just for me. And particularly when I work with Black women, oftentimes the hour or 75 minutes that we spend together is the only time across their week that is for them, because they are so fragmented and doled out to other entities, work, family, caregiving, the community, volunteer work, book club, like whatever the things might be, right? Managing people, all these things, that this becomes the only space, right, where they can strip all of that and they can say like, oh, I didn't like that. I'm like, oh, okay, that's great to hear. I'm glad to hear that you don't like things. I want to hear that you don't like things that happen in your day-to-day, right, life. Because in these other spaces, they don't feel kind of safe enough to be able to do that. So, in those ways, right, we're seeing there be a bit of a shift. Most people still come in crisis. I know there's, research shows as it relates to couples that relationship partners tend to not even make an appointment or like seek therapy until 5 to 7 years after a major crisis has happened, or after the negative thing. They wait 5 to 7 years on average after the thing. Right. So they're coming in, right, 7 years later, right, saying that, hey, we have communication issues and we just be fighting about stuff and we don't know why. And then we get this history. And I'm hearing that 10 years ago there was infidelity and y'all talked about it, but y'all good now. You're not.
Right.
You're not good.
You never resolved.
You're not good now.
Okay.
Yeah, you didn't resolve that, because that's right under the argument about the dishwasher. Like that's right there, right? So so people wait a really, really long time. So what we want to get the word out about is that you don't have to wait to be unwell to be well. Right? You don't have to wait until you are in crisis or not feeling well to take care of yourselves, right? And wanted to kind of change that model towards doing it earlier. As soon as you have a thought about like, oh, I wonder if, a therapist could help me understand that, that's the best time to go, right? You don't have to wait until that thing gets worse. You don't have to wait until you are in complete distress or crisis or not functioning in some way to go. And that tends to be when we see people. Another example I have of this is not really, I'm always a proponent for, and I talk to my clients a lot about this, that people tend to take days off from work when they're sick. Right, we wait until we are ill, and then when we're sick and we take these days off, we in the bed all day, we coughing, we sneezing, we just rolling around watching Netflix. Right. And I am a proponent for taking a day off when you feel well, so you can go do something.
Okay.
Right, I'm taking the day off not in illness, but in wellness that says, oh, I want to go to the park at 2:00 today. Take the day off and go to the park. Like, you want to use those days, right, so you can actually experience a healthy day not related to work. That's right. Cool. We reserve all of our health. We tend to reserve all of our health for the workspace and the workplace, versus no, it doesn't have to be a vacation like this kind of, again, this big kind of grandiose way in which to take care of yourself. Take a day off when you just know, like, okay, it's just a random day in a random week in a random month. I took the day off. Oh, you're not feeling well? I feel absolutely fine. Actually, I'm going to do this today. I'm going to go do this instead of saving everything and having to pack it in on the weekends. Yeah. Take a day off in health. Right, not an illness. So this the same kind of theme when it comes to engaging in therapeutic work. Do it when you're well. All right, get clear about some things. Get better at some things. Right, change course on some things. Oh yeah, I got that down. I really want to learn this about myself, and I'm really okay. Cool. You don't have to be struggling with anything. And then there are therapists who absolutely want to work with you, right? When you are just gaining insight about your life. I want to be able to maintain this, or I want to be able to, deepen this. Absolutely come in. Nothing has to be wrong for you to be able to deepen whatever it is that you're learning about yourself.
I love that. I love that. Because I will say, I feel like with my second therapist, I was kind of like, I think I need to go to therapy again. Like nothing crazy is happening, but I'm in the middle of a pandemic. I'm starting to feel like I got questions. So I'm going to go. Like, obviously, the first time it was a whole, grieving, like wildness. But like then, like you said, and I think me going at that moment helped shape me so much. I'm not going to say so much more, but like, because I knew specifically what I was going for when I first went, with the grieving. Yeah, like in basis, like, okay. And I learned so much about myself, about having a perfectionism complex and, trauma as a child, just all of these things that I don't know would have came up if I waited until like it tick boomed, you know what I mean?
And it's quite literally, it's harder to go in crisis. It's harder to go later, right? Just in terms of your mental capacity, just in terms of your problem solving skills to be able to make an appointment, to call somebody, to search through sites, right? It's harder to do when we are not feeling as well. You want to do that when you have some bandwidth to do that. Don't wait until even the search process becomes too distressing, because that's actually when people don't, I'm too stressed to find a therapist. I got to do this. I got to carve out time to do this. If you did this months ago, you would have had a little bit more bandwidth, right, to engage in a search, to really, kind of get in and kind of see what the vibes, right, are and kind of the energies are. You want to do that when you actually have the bandwidth, so you can choose properly in terms of a therapist. Again, this is a relationship, right? So that's why I always recommend doing it sooner, while you can still have some clarity about what you might need, versus just being in distress and just being like, oh my goodness, like I just need somebody to answer the phone. I'll see anybody. Right. So you don't have the same discernment when you're in distress. You can't engage in the same, literally the cognitive processes are a bit blocked off when you're in distress, right? So we want to be able to have all of your reserves when you are seeking, so that you can use the discernment that actually best suits your needs.
Oh, that's good. No, that's really, really good. Yeah, because it's a doozy when you are all over here trying to find, but unless you're like really determined, like I was really like, no, you gotta like figure this out. But
keep at this.
Yeah, but it was a struggle. It was a struggle. So I wholeheartedly believe that. So my last question is, I always like to ask guests when they come on, for people listening to this episode, who are like, okay, you know what, I think I might, tiptoe into this therapy thing, what do you want the biggest takeaway for them to be if they're listening to this episode?
That all growth requires grief. You can't grow in any area of your life. You can't deepen any area of your life without creating a new narrative for yourself, which means you got to let go of whatever narrative was there before. Even if you're replacing it, by piecemeal and kind of alternating it this way, that grief is inherent to the process of growth. And again, the more that we can really kind of rally around understanding grief and loss and transition and adjustment and disappointment as a part of how we move through things, and kind of gain access to who we kind of fully and kind of truly and deeply are, it kind of smooths out the process for us. But stop avoiding grief, right, on your way to the growth that you want and that you seek and that you talk about and that you search for and that you do all this stuff. Really kind of taking in, ways in which the grieving process is inherent, right, to this kind of work. And once you know that, and kind of a therapist can help you understand that more and kind of honor it in that way, it can be less judgmental with yourself, but you can also understand what kind of growth you're looking for when you kind of have a bit more of that plug. So
no, I love that. Ooh, that was so good. Well, thank you so much again for being on. Like,
you're welcome.
Absolute honor and pleasure. If they want to find you, follow you, reach out to you, please share where they can find you at.
Absolutely. I engage the most on, I've pulled back a little bit, but I got to get back on Instagram. And my handle is at Dr. _ Ayana _ That's at Dr. _ Ayanna _ The name of my practice is Ascension Behavioral Health, ASCENSION Behavioral Health. So you can find me at www.ascensionbehavioralhealth. Same thing on Facebook. And if you are interested in speaking engagements, groups, things like that, in terms of corporate stuff or organizations or anything local, you can find more information about me at www.drabramsabh.com. That's DRABRAMS and the letters ABH.com.
Love it. Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for being here. I know this is going to help so many people. I cannot wait till it drops. So thank you again so much. You guys, that was amazing, amazing, amazing. Just both of the therapists that I had on for this kind of 2-part episode. I'm just super grateful that they were able to come on. And Dr. Ayanna, oh God, just amazing. She had so many wonderful points, especially talking about, going to therapy, not necessarily when you are, kind of at the bomb exploding, right? Kind of what John was talking about in episode 5 when he was talking about, having a bomb inside of you or like a clock and then it ticks. And the next thing you know, the bomb explodes, right? Not being able to have that, but being able to kind of work through that and maybe be in a place where like, I wonder if a therapist would know, and like being able to do that. And so what I hope that you gathered from these 2 episodes is, therapy is okay. And I'll speak obviously specifically to the Black community, because obviously as a Black woman and growing up in that space of not talking about therapy, or, as Justin said, and as Dr. Ayanna said, like, what happens in this house stays in this house. We don't go outside this house. We don't talk about it. Having to kind of carry a lot of generational trauma or intergenerational trauma, as Justin was talking about, or, having to carry, I'll say, again, being a Black woman, the strong Black woman, that narrative that Dr. Ayanna was talking about, or even in our relationships, not understanding how to kind of navigate that and what that looks like. So I hope what you gathered from, like I said, this kind of 2-part series is to know that it's okay. Like, it's totally fine to go to therapy. Nothing is wrong with you going to therapy. And from even a religious standpoint, from someone who is, I grew up Christian. You guys know that I talk about my love for Jesus, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. I talk about all that stuff. And I, like, honestly, there's a shirt and I need to get it. I should have worn it. But it says, I think it says I have Jesus and a therapist. And that's what it is, right? Like, I feel like that, you ask God for sign, you ask him for confirmation, you ask him for these things, but you never assume that it's going to be in that way, right? Well, like, God, give me a glorious miracle. And it's like, he'll put an amazing therapist in your life. You're like, but God, I need an amazing miracle. And he's like, what you want me to do? Like, I'm trying to help you. Okay. So, if you are in that space of like, oh, well, it's frowned upon in the community because, again, this is what we learned in the community, and you pray through it. And I think that's a great thing to do. Don't get me wrong. I pray about everything. I pray before every episode that I do. I pray before every episode. I pray before any decision I make. I just pray just to pray. But at the same time, I knew that when you pray, God's going to answer your prayers, and he's going to answer your prayers in the way that he sees fit. And I'll say, for me specifically in my grieving process, at the first moment that I was, that I had seen a therapist, he answered my prayer in a way of an older white woman. And she was great. She was amazing. She helped me through the thickest part of my grief. Right. But I think I've shared this with you guys before, that I had gotten to a place within the grieving process that I knew that I had to go to therapy, because I was getting mad at my friends for no reason. I was not able to communicate properly. I just was like sad all the time. Right. And it was hard. Like she said, like Dr. Ayanna said, it was hard to try and find someone to help me at that time, because it was daunting, because I was tired. I had all these emotions. Right. instead of like working, like if I would have started therapy, like when my dad got sick, that might have helped a little bit because I would have been working through the process, right? And then even like she said, with the estate planning, him not having that stuff together, family conflict, having to work through that whole agenda, even dating and relationships. Like I'm about to start therapy again because I'm getting to a place where I do want to eventually have a family and get married and things. And I know that there's a lot of things that I have worked through because I've been through therapy, but there's things that relationally that I don't know if I understand or know, or know how to navigate without my parents, right? Or by, not having those conversations, like I said, with my parents growing up. And I just want to make sure that when I'm going into my future relationship with my husband, that we're both coming to the relationship whole. I always say like, better half is cool. That's cute. But, I want to be like my better whole or my best whole, right? I want to come to the relationship whole just like I want my spouse to. And so like going to therapy to work through that. So like you can go to therapy for different things. You don't have to be in a crazy state to do that. But with grief, right? Or even whether you assign it as grief or not, like to be in a space and understand like, you know what? Maybe a therapist can help me work through this, or maybe, I'm used to doing this, but maybe I just need some different support and my family and friends can't necessarily do that for me, or they've done it for me for that long. And it doesn't seem to be like pushing me to that next level, right? Like that's what it is. And so I hope that when you listen to these 2 episodes, you got that therapy is okay. It's okay for us to talk about it. It's especially important in the grieving process to understand kind of where you're going through, right? The different stages and the different layers and working through those different emotions that you're having. Like it's definitely important and okay to do that, throughout the process. I think everybody who I brought on talks about how they've been to therapy and what that looks like for them and how it helped them in the grieving process, right? And so I really, really, really just wanted to talk about this. And I can do 27 more episodes with therapists, and I probably will do some more episodes about therapy because I want it to be like, I just want this conversation to continue happening, right? I feel like the therapy conversation is a conversation that's going to continuously be happening over and over and over again. And it's only going to continue to grow, and we're only going to continue to grow and get better when we do that, right? When we have that conversation, when we continue the conversation and we normalize the conversation around therapy, right? And so, again, as I always say, as I always end my episodes, as you're going through the process and you're making the decision to go to therapy and maybe being the first one in your family to do it, or making the decision like, hey, maybe I need a little more support, or working through it, calling different therapists, going to different ones, finding the one, not understanding this one, not understanding that, not really understanding the process, but being vulnerable in the moment, right? As I always, always, always say, be kind to yourself and give yourself grace, because if you don't, who will? That's it, you guys. Thank you so, so much for joining me on another episode of This Too Shall Suck podcast, a fresh perspective on grief. If you haven't already, follow me on all the socials, on social media, on Instagram and Facebook at This2ShallSuckPodcast.com. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, please remember to rate, review, follow, and share it with your family and friends. That will help me out tremendously. And I really, really appreciate each and every one of you who does that. I see you guys all the time sharing, rating, all of that. I see you guys all the time. This episode and every single episode is produced by my amazing producer, Mike Sick, and the original music is produced by Jimmy Samaj. Again, you guys, I love you. I love you so much, and I thank you guys as always. I'm sending you guys love and light in your life because you deserve it, and I'll see you on the next episode. Mwah. All right, my loves, I hope you all enjoyed that episode. You can actually listen to This Too Shall Suck podcast, a fresh perspective on grief, on all listening platforms. And make sure, if you're not already, following me on social media, on Instagram and on Facebook at This Too Shall Suck podcast. And you can hit my website as well. Learn more about your girl, Loryn Denise, at www.This2ShallSuckPodcast.com. If you love this episode, if it resonated with you, make sure you hit that like button. Let me know, because I know I need to make more videos like that for you. And meet me in the comments. Let's talk about it. I love, love, love talking to y'all. And make sure you definitely hit that little bell, that little subscribe button. Thank you guys as always, and I'll see you on the next episode.